Hi and welcome back to my channel and to my monthly wrap-up where I talk about the books I've read this month. So in November, 3 significant things happened. The first one is that I started working again and I'm finished with my parental leave. That might lead to me reading fewer books, but we'll just wait and see. The second thing is that I've had a massive success when it comes to buying books at flea markets. And the last and maybe most significant thing for this channel is that I've done my first live stream, which I thoroughly enjoyed. You might say that I'm ending this year with trying to do all the things that I promised myself I would do in January, which is always a great idea. It really was a cool experience, so thank you to all of you that participated. And if you want to see the live stream, it's under the live tab on my channel. It's not in the regular videos where it was before. And some of you have asked me where you most easily can find out if I'm going to do a live stream, and that is by hitting the notification bell in the comments or descriptions. I can try to find an animation I can put right here, but if not, you'll find it in the description or on my channel page. And I do hope to make another live stream in the foreseeable future. I will try to be better at warning you all when that occurs. But if I'm being completely honest, I didn't want that many people to view my first live stream because I was afraid of messing it up. But next time, the more the merrier. But let's get to the books I read this month, and the first one is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, the second novel in the Mistborn series. And firstly, this will contain spoilers, at least for the next 20 to 30 seconds, I guess. So if you don't want to know what happened in the first novel, you might have to skip 20 seconds. This book takes place 1 year after the first book ended, and in the first one, it's about the place called the Final Empire. That's the world they live in. It's ruled by a guy called the Lord Ruler. The first book ends with our main character Vegne killing the Lord Ruler, and then no one really knows who's going to rule this world. There's a lot of ruling, and that makes this book all about who's going to take charge of this place and their transition into democracy. A very bad form of democracy, you might say. As with the first one, this also has two storylines. The first one is the things that happen day to day in the present, and the second one is a narrator talking about what happened in the past through very brief moments. So in each chapter you have a thing like this, where it tells a little tale, but often very mysterious, so you don't know what's going to happen. But it all makes sense at some point in the story. So that was in very basic terms what that book was about. And I was very curious to see what I would feel reading a sequel, because I haven't done that. I've sort of not done that. I've at least not done that with a high fantasy novel. And Brandon Sanderson is really famous for his world building and making that a central part of his novels, and that can be a bit boring, to me at least. And the first novel had a lot of that world building, so jumping into the second novel was a bit more comfortable. I knew all the characters, I knew how the magic system worked, and it was kind of familiar, which really helped. And I think that was one of the most positive things about this novel. I really enjoyed the start, but towards the end it got a bit boring, and I think that's because I felt like the first half was kind of a build-up, which was exciting, but then not enough things happened. And that can be the case when you read books, that you feel like this is heading somewhere and it didn't. And I know many people talk about this one as the worst of the three main or first Mistborn books, and I get that, I understand what they're saying, but I'm still going to read the third one because that's supposed to have a lot of twists and turns that will excite you, and probably they will excite me as well. For those who are really good at reading fantasy and seeing where this is going, you might not be that surprised, but I'm not one of those, I think. Since this one is all about the transition of power, it had a lot of politics to it, but a lot of repetitive politics, so the politics thing wouldn't maybe bother me in other novels, but it just was a tad too much. It also had a couple of love stories, but I didn't get much out of those. Something that struck me was how fond I became of some characters, but I never really cared for the interactions between the characters in this novel. And so it didn't really matter if I liked them or not, because once they talked to other people in the story, it sort of fell apart. It may not sound like it, but I gave this one as well 3 out of 5 stars. It is easily read, it is entertaining, and you get to spend a whole lot of time in another universe. So there's that. Since I decided to read Sanderson, it made me lag behind on my physical reading goal again. And thus I had to find the smallest book in my shelf, and that was På vegne av Venner by Kristopher Schau. Translated, that is behalf of friends, and that's usually what it says in the newspapers when people are getting buried without having friends or relatives present, or they think no one will be present for their funeral. So Kristopher Schau is a TV personality, a rock star, and before I heard about this novel a couple of years ago, I didn't think he was a writer. For a small period of time he visited some of these funerals because he wanted to know what they were like, if they resembled the normal funerals. I had high expectations for this novel because I'd heard so many great things about it, but what surprised me was that it was way more about him personally and his thoughts around going to these funerals and traveling to them, taking the taxi to the funeral, what met him when he went in the door, than the actual ceremony. That surprised me a bit because I thought this was going to be a tearjerker and be a really, really sad novel about abandoned people, but it sort of took a step back and looked at it from the outside instead of trying to get into the people that were getting buried. I do think that before I heard about this novel, I really didn't reflect on this being a thing. It never occurred to me that people were buried alone. And it's a sad thought, but he doesn't make it that sentimental, which I'm glad he didn't, because it doesn't have to be like that. People can die alone and be happy with it as well. But at the same time, I really like the thought of going to funerals for people that haven't got anyone there for them. It seems like a nice thing, but if I'd done it myself, I would also feel like I did it for myself rather than the person lying there. Obviously. So that was the second one. And after reading that one, I still felt that I had to read shorter novels, so I did a vote on my YouTube channel, and you guys voted this one as the book that I should read next. Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. This one is about one day in Mrs. Dalloway's life, and basically she's preparing for a party. And I absolutely hated it. This novel reminded me of all the things I hated about reading before. When I started this, after just a few pages, I realized I don't want to read this anymore. But since I gave the task to you, I felt like I had to read it. And I do regret it, because this would have been my fastest DNF ever, and that would feel fulfilling, but at least now I recognize what I don't want in a novel. So note to self, next time I'm putting up a poll, I'll make a better selection. The thing I disliked, and it was obvious from the start, is how confusing this novel is. And I really don't have the time to spend an hour per page, because that's what I would have been needing to do. And each time this book had a significant moment, something happened where I thought, well, now we're getting somewhere, because there are some dramatic things in this novel that should have been good for me as a plot-driven reader, except there isn't a plot. It's just things happen and then they disappear, and I have nothing to hold on to guide me through it. So I know there's a lot going on, I just don't know what. That being said, at some point I might want to revisit this, because I really think that there is something there. It's not like with Frankenstein that just sucked for being bad. This one I see that if I put all my effort into it and get a bit older and a bit wiser, maybe this will be rewarding. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. But I do know that there are people in the world that has tried reading this before and ended up liking it some years afterwards, because they gave it another chance. Will that be me? Probably not. But can it be me? It can. Maybe. And now I'm curious if you wanted me to read this novel because you didn't want to, or because you thought I would like it, or you like it yourself. Please leave a comment. And while all this was going on, of course, I listened to my Karl Ove Knausgård and My Struggle 5. And this one is all about him being a student in Bergen and trying to become a published writer and meeting other writers. And I absolutely loved it. I listened to some of it while I was in Bergen, and Bergen, for you that don't know, is Norway's most beautiful city, and I just felt great. So I think I was very lucky to listen to this book in particular while being at the same place. In this one, he gets really drunk all the time, he does stupid things, and he feels sorry for himself, even though he really deserves what he gets most of the time. And that's one of the things that makes this great, because it's so profoundly human. And I wrote down something while I listened to this. I wrote that he talks himself down, but it sometimes feels like he's saying, look how difficult my life has been, look how much resistance I've met, and still I became so famous. At least that's the feeling I get, because he can be really arrogant. And that's what I like. He has a broad spectrum of feelings, and he does stupid things, people do stupid things to him, but he's more often the bad guy than not, I feel. In my live stream, I ended up talking way more about Knausgård than I thought I would, because the whole thing is just so fascinating. I'm still going to make a separate video. I know I've mentioned that a lot, but I really mean it. At some point, I'm going to try to collect all my things, or my thoughts at least, about this man and these books. One thing that I noticed about myself when reading this one in particular is that I reacted negatively to him talking about other celebrities. For example, he talks a lot about Jon Fosse in this one, and not especially in a very negative way, but he describes how he is as a human, and I felt more bad for the famous people that he writes about rather than his own relatives. Is this because the celebrities have the spotlight on them from before and don't need that extra person trying to analyze them in a book? Maybe. I have to think about it some more. But now I'm finished with My Struggle 5, on to My Struggle 6 that I've already started, of course, and I'm going to finish that in December. When reading Knausgård, I have a lot of thoughts in my head that I write down, but with this next one, I didn't have any thoughts at all while reading it. Mostly because I read it quite quickly, because I enjoyed it. And that's The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This is about a guy called Linus. He is a caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth, and he travels to different orphanages to see if they should be open or not. The work environment is very dystopian and dark, and he can't have any personal artifacts in his office, and he can't have any spots on his clothing, then he might get fired or get a reprimand or anything like that. One day he is summoned by extremely upper management, and he is given this special assignment to go to this orphanage to see how operations work at this place. And this is a special kind of orphanage where they have 6 kids, where one of them is the Antichrist, and the other ones are also quite special, you might say. This is one of those books that Norwegian bookshops might call TikTok books. It's very easily read. The thing that annoyed me quite a bit in the beginning was that, well, extremely upper management just seems so silly, but then again he works in this very dark place that reminded me of the feeling I got when I read Aldous Huxley Brave New World. So really dystopian, and you get that dark vibe from The Office, but then he leaves home, he has this annoying neighbor, but you don't get the sense of how the world is. It's just, The Office is a cruel place where he has to do what he's told, but you don't know if he has any other opportunities or if he's forced to work there. It didn't make any sense. I thought they should have described how the world really was. Instead, they just told me as a reader that this is a lousy place, he does what he's told. We don't know if he likes the place or not. Of course, you get some of this information later on, but then he travels to this orphanage, and it's just an ordinary village, but still you don't get the vibe of how is this world exactly. And as with Brandon Sanderson I talked about earlier, you really have that world building, but I don't need a world building, I just know what to expect from my surroundings in this novel. So it's very tied up to his work and this orphanage. It's more about the characters, of course, than the world, which is fine, which I prefer, but Did that make sense? And this novel truly is an exaggerated one, because in the start all things are dark, and then he comes to this loving and caring orphanage, which you might have expected, and things are going differently, I might say. I'm not going to spoil anything, but this might be a predictable book. I don't see that as a spoiler. This is a happy kind of book. Look at it. All this negativity being spread out to you, when I finished this novel, I considered giving this a 5-star. I see that that can be hard to understand, but the start I didn't enjoy, but all the characters that live in this orphanage are just so cozy and lovable, and you really start to care for them, and you really, really do. So that's why this novel became a great one. I gave it 4 stars, but it could easily have been a 5 if they cut out 50% of the introduction. Of course, this one very easily read, highly entertaining, and I do recommend reading it. Just be a bit patient. So those were all the books I read in November. I'm happy with my reads, but I wish there were a couple more. But what do you know? Starting to work again actually takes up some of my time, surprisingly. But as long as I reach my yearly physical reading goal, I'm happy. And that's 53. I think I'm lagging 2 behind at the moment, but I've bought some new books that might speed up that process. They're easily read. And as always, the books will be mentioned in the description down below. And again, if you want to be notified when I publish videos or when I do live streams, you can push the notification button. Bell icon? Yeah, something like that. And thank you for watching this video. I'll see you next time. Bye!